to move the next slides.
I will.
But look at that, looks beautiful.
Excellent. Thank you, Amy. And I love that you remember that story.
It's really great. I mean, it's so, it's really powerful. When I think that is sort of this work, when you do work that really helps people and you connect with people, it's rewarding enough to, thankfully, because it's not highly paid.
Yeah. All right, so we ready to go?
Yes, if everyone else could mute, that might help us. I'm going to mute two Heidi Sue, and you can just.
That's fine, thank you. And I'm sorry if my screen's a little jiggly. I have to do this by phone. For some reason, my desktop isn't cooperating today. But you know what? Yankee ingenuity, right? So, all right. So in a little while, Sabrina Glover, our Assistant Director of Deaf Services, and Jen Rioux, our Disabilities Advocate, are going to join me and talk about their program specifically. So I'm really looking forward to that. And we have our contact information at the end slide too. So our emails are on there. If you need me to send you this slide, I'm more than happy to. So just go ahead and send me an email. Just know that when I reply, our emails might go into your spam folder. So if you think you haven't heard from me, go ahead and look for us there, because chances are that you'll find us, because you'll see our emails end with .help. So we're trailblazers at Pathways, but unfortunately, technology is not catching up to us quite yet. So, all right, Amy, go ahead and switch the slide. So who is Pathways? We're a rape crisis center in Central Mass. In fact, as Rachel mentioned, we used to be the Rape Crisis Center of Central Mass. And about 8 years ago, Rachel, we changed our name to Pathways for Change. And it was a 2-year process to do that, because we needed to make sure that we're putting out a name that feels empowering, feels comfortable for people to come through our doors, because the Rape Crisis Center of Central Mass was never a name that we could really hang a sign up on for, because anybody who came into the agency, people would know why they're coming to us. So we need an empowering name that also gave people a level of anonymity when they came to the agency. Our main office is in Worcester, but we have satellite sites throughout our Central Mass area, and it covers 47 cities and towns. So the border north to the border south, we're technically the largest rape crisis center in terms of geography, but the Boston area rape crisis center is the largest in terms of population. So they get that moniker. And they were the first ones in Massachusetts, the first rape crisis center. We came about a month or two. Thank you, Rachel. We changed the name in 2009. Great memory. And so our counselors at Pathways are community health workers, not therapists. So they can't and won't diagnose or do assessments or treatment plans and all those other beautiful things that therapists do. But our work is still meaningful, and we work very well with therapists, because we're going to specialize just in the rape crisis work. Rachel, I think you're saying something, but I can't hear you. I'm so sorry. So what makes us special community health workers to be able to do this work, as Rachel mentioned, she went through our training many years ago and became a volunteer. And all our volunteers, all our staff, all our per diem staff, sorry, I had to put my phone on Do Not Disturb. All our staff go through a state-sanctioned training. Massachusetts Department of Public Health allows us to do the trainings, but they set what the requirements are. And so there's several topics that equal 35 hours of training. So it's like taking a course in college. Our training, we do the fundamental basic training that the state requires, and then we add additional sections to it because we work with a lot of various populations. We pride ourselves in being a multicultural, multilingual agency, and we have staff who speak several different languages to be able to meet those needs. And we also use interpreting services when necessary. But because of that state sanctioned training, because of all the requirements are met, so they have to get supervision from a licensed individual. So that's me. And we also have an LMHC that also helps me do that work, as well as getting continued education. Then we can call ourselves rape crisis counselors. And that then allows us access to privileged information. So in Massachusetts, we have these laws that if a stranger taps you on the shoulder and says, I've experienced this crime, then you very well may be called into court to testify, even if that's all you know. So because of the training that we go through and the oversight from DPH and the clinicians that are involved, we're able to have access to privileged information. It doesn't mean the courts won't try to get our records, but I can say for Pathways for Change, in 49 years we've been around, we have not once lost a case. And some of us have been threatened with going to prison for contempt of court for not giving our records. But we're okay with that. That's one of the requirements of being a leader at a rape crisis center. Heidi, correct me if I'm wrong, but we can't be for, well, they can try, Amy, they surely can try. But we're willing to fight that fight. And let me tell you, because we're not therapists, there's very little information in the records that actually can be helpful for a defense or the ADAs or DAs, but it's a matter of principle. So because our staff aren't therapists, we don't take last names. And the information that's in the records is just basically that they contacted us and what is the contact information for us to reach out to them. So all other information, it just doesn't exist, but it's a matter of principle that we'll fight for those records because survivors' privacy is important and how they tell their story is important, and it's up to them to tell the story, not ours. And I'm going to say this a few times this afternoon, but the dynamics of sexual violence is about the abuse of power and control. And we believe 100% that survivors have the right to have power and control over their own lives. And so we don't want in any way to model their experience, even if it's with the best intentions. Okay, Amy, next. So I first want to point out that we view sexual violence as a form of oppression. Sexual violence is a type of unwanted sexual content. And it comes from a place of sexist attitudes and actions and sometimes murder. And there's a reason why we use the term survivor, because they've survived the experience. The sad fact is not everybody survives the experience. And that's the heartbreaking piece and the piece that not everybody understands about sexual violence. They think it's done and you move on. Some people die in the act of this crime. Sometimes people commit suicide because the trauma is just so big. There's a lot of also things that go into a kind of our societal thinking that we'll talk about in a little bit. But the tactics included in sexual violence are force and threats and manipulation or coercion. And there's social norms that happen that contribute to our desensitization, and the very least to our feeding into this type of violence. So our society, in a lot of ways, if you look at the things that we're viewing, that we're consuming visually and through books and so forth, in a way it condones a lot of violence. And sexual violence, again, is about power and control. So using power over another. And also operates out of traditional constructs of masculinity. Now, that's not to say men aren't sexually assaulted, and far more men are than are able to feel safe and comfortable coming forward, because social norms in terms of gender roles come into play as well. But fundamentally, overall, sexual violence is a subjugation of women. And oftentimes when men are assaulted, it's to demasculinate them. Sorry, messy word. Okay, Amy, next slide. So oppression is a cause and effect of sexual violence. And sexual violence has ties into inequality, just like oppression does, whether it's interpersonal, culturally, or systemically, right? So that sounds familiar to oppression. And offenders will target people who are vulnerable. Maybe it's somebody who's in a position of less power, maybe at work or within their own families or within their community dynamics. And offenders will take advantage of those. Maybe they were assaulted or abused as children. And there's a vulnerability that perpetrators kind of focus in on. And so the targets of these crimes are not by accident. And again, there's a lot of things culturally that go on and that can be changed in order for us to really combat this. This is, the work that we do is helping survivors heal, but we also go out to the communities like this and do trainings like this. And then we also have these victim blaming dynamics in society. And I have a theory about that. I think that victim blaming happens because if I'm talking to somebody who's been sexually violated, and it's a heinous crime, it truly is. And it touches people to the core to hear that somebody's been hurt like this. But I want to figure out how I can prevent this from happening to myself, right? So I'm going to pick out things that you did wrong, like maybe you didn't wear the right thing, or maybe you drank too much, or maybe you were hanging around people that you shouldn't be hanging around, whatever that means. But that's not what causes sexual violence. It's the perpetrator, it's the offenders who target people and choose their victims, truly. And systemically, there's been racism and oppressions built into sexual violence for decades and generations. There's a story of Rioux Taylor, who in 1944 was sexually assaulted by at least 4 white men. They had one person, they had witnesses, they had another person who actually confessed, but it never went to court because Rioux Taylor's Black. And then we all know the story of Christine Blasey Ford and Anita Hill, and how just publicly they were, put through the ringers as they testified for the hearings for the Supreme Court justices. And hopefully people know Tarana Burke, who is the original founder of the Me Too movement. And she was working with a lot of teenage girls of color. And one story she kept hearing over and over was about their victimization. And she wished at the time she said to them, "Me too." And that's where the Me Too movement was born. And then again, decade later, Melissa, the actor, tweeted it out, and it just took off from there, because the amount of victimization that happens in this country, in this world, is profound. Next slide, please. So just to talk a little bit about some of the laws and regulations in Massachusetts, the legal age of consent in Mass is 16. And let me just put that in a frame of reference, folks. So that 16 can consent to having sex with a 17-year-old. That 16-year-old can have consent with a 25-year-old. That 16-year-old can have consent to having sex with a 55-year-old. So just think about that dynamics. We're giving this very profound decision to somebody who's very vulnerable, because we know teenagers are very vulnerable. And that can be changed if anybody wants to ever change it. We've got to ban forces and go after any legislation and support any legislation that talks about wanting to change the age. In some parts of the country, the age might be 14. In other parts of the country, the age might be 18. But in Massachusetts, it's 16. We also can never assume consent. So that means if somebody doesn't unequivocally say yes, then they may not be giving consent. There's a lot of things that we try to teach when it comes to healthy relationships is to check in with the person that you're being intimate with. And it may not sound romantic, but if it's done right, it can be. Because sometimes somebody already has the experience of having been sexually violated at some point in their life. They may, find themselves being intimate with somebody but shut down because that's not really what they do. They get triggered and they go into that fight, flight, freeze. And the reality is many people freeze when they're scared. You also can't consent if you're incapacitated, and that's whether you consumed alcohol consensually or narcotics consensually or prescription drugs or had injuries. But also if somebody gives you drugs in your drink, which is a very common thing that happens and kind of more the stereotypical perspective of sexual violence. Also complying with the rapist's demands is not consent. And let me give you a little story about that I've heard many times over 2 decades with the agency. Oftentimes, somebody's being sexually violated and they might have children, and that children might be in the same room with them or might be in the next room. And the individual, as they're being sexually violated, doesn't scream or yell or kick, which is not an uncommon situation. But often in these cases, they're not yelling, screaming, kicking, because if my baby cries in the other room and draws attention, what's that person then going to do to them and me in retaliation? So parents will often make the decision to stay quiet and endure the crime that they're experiencing to protect their babies. And I hear shame and judgment sent the way of survivors because they didn't fight back. But there's darn good reasons. And plus, unless we've ever been in a stressful, traumatic situation, we don't know what we'll do. Okay, Amy, next slide. Amy, next slide, please.
I'm trying, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Darn technology problems. We're going to persevere. So regardless of court, whether somebody's involved with getting court or whether they're feeling comfortable even reporting, because the reality is most sexual violence incidences aren't reported, that we're still there for an individual, they're still there to support them. And most of those reported, by the way, seldom result in prosecution. But all sexual violence is harmful, whether it's verbal, because many people don't view sexual violence as verbal, but sexual harassment is absolutely impactful in a very harmful way on individuals. And you think a lot of people who endorse sexual harassment happens in the workplace by people in power over them. And that was very clear during the height of the Me Too movement a couple of years ago. All right, next. Okay, some of the slides you'll have to click, sorry. So I'm not able to see chat, but that number, that very big number that I don't have that much money in my bank account, I promise you. That is the lifetime expense of one individual who has experienced a rape. Just a rape. I'm not talking about all the other forms of sexual violence. You can go ahead and click the other slide. Just rape. And that may include court fees. It may include therapy fees. It may include moving because they can't live in that same building where the perpetrator lives. It includes so many things. But again, that's just rape. Many experiences of sexual violence may not include penetration, which is the definition, penetration by any object in any orifice. In Massachusetts, that's the definition of rape. But there are other forms of sexual violence that are just as dangerous and harmful to an individual that isn't included in this statistic. So it's an uncomfortable number to put out there. And some people say, why even trying to put a price tag? Because this is a human issue. But the reality is the price tag is what gets the attention of our governments and our municipalities. And so that's why I have it in here. I hope one day we can get an economic burden of other forms of sexual violence, because it's staggering. Okay, next slide. So some facts. Most survivors know their assailant, and that's not what we typically see in the news. You go ahead and keep clicking, that's okay. Most men don't sexually violate. That few that do commit multiple assaults. So we absolutely believe most men don't violate, but a lot of men certainly are violated. So why does it feel like it's such a huge pandemic? I'm sorry to use that triggery word, but sexual violence is a pandemic. It's the silent pandemic. And so one perpetrator could have 100 or more victims in their lifetime. And remember, sexual assault is reported maybe 10 to 15% of the time. And then even less than that actually goes to court, and even less than that is actually convicted. So that's why, because we all need to figure out how to band together and work together to end this. Most people tell the truth about being assaulted and being victimized. And falsely reporting this crime is no different than any other crime, according to the FBI's crime statistics. What makes this a hard number to track realistically is everybody defines sexual violence differently. And within the sexual violence, each one of those different incidences can be defined differently. So we aren't using common language across the country, which makes it a really hard number to report. But if you dial back the statistics of what is logged as false reporting, half of those reports are made by somebody who wasn't the survivor. And so if somebody tells a really intimate story about you to a whole bunch of people, and you didn't want that story told, what's your instinct? Didn't happen. So redaction of stories go down as false reporting too. So anybody who has run statistics, anybody who's done research, we all know numbers can get funky, and interpretation of those numbers can be really awkward and often inaccurate without an analysis. Sexual violence does affect everyone. And so when I do my presentations, I'm talking to survivors out there, but I'm also talking to everybody else who, thank you, I'm so grateful you haven't had that experience, if that's your story. But whether you know it or not, you know somebody. So statistically right now, it's 1 in 4 female identified, 1 in 6 male identified. Transgender numbers are just through the roof, and very few people are running those numbers. Are experience some form of sexual violence in their lives. And so every one of those people have people who care about them, and friends and family. And then there's a whole profession that's built right around sexual violence. Hello, rape crisis centers. And we wouldn't be open if there wasn't a need. And I used to joke, I'm going to work myself out of a job, but maybe that won't happen in my generation. But. So trigger warning, I'm going to show some pictures. We're just going to go through this section quickly for the sake of time. You go ahead, click, Amy, that's fine. But I'm going to show you some pictures because I want to draw a picture of how society feeds into sexual violence, which may also help draw a very sad light on why it continues to happen. So next slide, please. Sexual violence is a symptom of society. So we have a society that's built on entitlement, and that's whether, and that creates power imbalance, of course, whether it's in family dynamics, intimate relationships. We know for sure gender has imbalances. We know sexuality, there's imbalances. We know culturally, right? If we talk about misogyny and how women are still fighting for the same pay rate as men, and women of color have even a lower pay rate than white women. So see, oppressions are built in some more. So we have that, the imbalances and the entitlements, but we also have what goes on in media, because, right, our media is a reflection of our culture, right? So print ads, TVs, movies, music have misogynistic values often. Toys are gendered. So we have pink for girls and blue for boys, and boys get all the fighting stuff and the fix-it stuff, and girls get the homemaker stuff and how to look pretty stuff. And then also video games, and we're going to have another triggery picture in a moment. So put whatever armor you need on. So go ahead and click. This is a picture from Grand Theft Auto. Go ahead, Amy, click again. So when people spend hour upon hour using a game controller to kill people, to steal things, hire prostitutes, beat women, it begins to blur the edges of what's okay in real life. And I worry, so I've done this presentation for many years, and it evolves as society evolves. So I add, take out. And I have to tell you, there was a time that I was thinking of taking the slide out, but then the pandemic hit. And what were a lot of our youth doing? Playing video games. And I just for the record, I'm not one of those, you got to stop purchasing things. You got to stop buying these things. Well, yes, a little bit. But I also understand that a lot of these things are meant for specific age groups and specific maturities. And unfortunately, kids way too young are playing games like Grand Theft Auto. And there's even adults now who, if they've grown up in this desensitized world, very well could also be continuing their desensitization. Okay, next slide. So here's some pictures. The one on the left is a legs advertisement. For legs, I don't know if anybody remembers legs eggs. They were a pantyhose. Where's the pantyhose in that picture? So we can say, oh, that was the 1950s. Of course, you know, women had their place in the kitchen and cleaning and taking care of their man. But when you put a head on a rug, the message is you're a rug. There's nothing that says otherwise. There's nothing that says that. And then he's got his foot on her head, by the way, too, keeping her in her place. And that's for pantyhose. So in the early 2000s, Dolce & Gabbana, and I'm sorry for anybody out there who loves Dolce & Gabbana. I hear they have great bags, great cologne, great clothes, great shoes, all this great stuff. But their advertising is terrible. So this came out in the early 2000s, and this is modeling a gang rape. They're half dressed. She's being held down. If you can see her face, she's not happy. This is not somebody who's enjoying herself. And in Italy, citizens said, this is disgusting. You can't put this up. And so Dolce & Gabbana did take it down. And I was like, whoo, I was just about to take this out of my presentation until, and go ahead, click, Amy. They came up with this one. So, women don't want to be marginalized and oppressed. So we'll do it to men too and make the level playing ground. It doesn't work that way because we don't want to oppress anybody. We don't want to marginalize anybody. So this is a video that is sorry, Dr. Paulette, I know it's disgusting, but I think it's important for us to see what goes on, because these may not be magazines we might consume, but they could be magazines that's in a dentist's office or a doctor's office, and it could be open to that page, because these are found in Good Housekeeping, in GQ, and all these magazines that maybe not quite as relevant these days, but they're there, and our kids could have access. And you could think about gender roles, and you look at those two pictures. It gives a picture of how men are virile and in control, and how women or gay men are supposed to be subjugated, are oppressed. So we don't have time to watch this TED Talk from Gail Dines. That's okay, Amy. But if you have a chance, and I'll send the PowerPoint out if anybody's interested in a PDF, so you can click on the links and get to it. But it's a very powerful video, and it talks about pornography and how it also feeds it, because pornography today is not the pornography from decades ago. Not that that was okay either, but it's, pornography is really what has moved forward technology, what has caused us to need faster computers. Not that any of us are consuming it, but that computers need to be stronger and faster and stronger and faster in order to be able to access these websites. So the porn culture in a lot of ways has facilitated that. So the consumers can get their porn quicker. But the images in the porn are misogynistic times a million, are racist. A woman of color, a Black woman, will be depicted as tropical and maybe in leopard print and animalistic. White women are often infantilized and shown as little children. And most of these pornography stories that are out there, we even call them stories, is ridiculous, but are not consensual either, because many of them are given drugs to quiet them. And their bodies are defiled and damaged seriously in this. So go ahead and click again. So the average age of consumption, according to Gail, is 11 to 12. I agree that fundamentally I do disagree with Gail in the sense that the folks I've spoken to over the years, 9 and 10. I've known people who've started consuming pornography at the age of 9 and 10. And maybe they were victims of sexual violence, trying to make sense of what happened. Maybe they're curious, maybe their parents aren't having healthy sexuality conversations with them. But most of the time they stumble on it, because porn culture takes language and tricks people into Googling those searches. For instance, my son, when he was about 12 years old, he was at my office, and to keep him busy, he liked to color. And so he was going to download some Pokemon pictures so he could color. He came running out to me. I was in the middle of talking to some people. He came running out to me in tears, saying, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do it." A simple Google search for Pokemon sent him to multiple pornography sites. And so I had to do a lot of support in conversation. And, he grew up in the rape crisis culture. So thankfully he was learning things as he go along, but he really thought he did something wrong when it wasn't his fault. It was the pornography who was overtaking our cultural language that should be innocent. So victimization, AKA desensitization, happens. So if we're seeing a woman being assaulted multiple times in pornography, then that also changes somebody's, they need more and more of that in order to be sexually gratified. And that starts at a very young age. Go ahead. You can go ahead and click through them all. It affects an individual's capacity to be intimate, increased risk of depression and anxiety, because I promise you the people who are stumbling on this porn, especially at their young ages, are confused by what they're seeing and feel shame for what they're seeing, but also consuming these things, it rewrites their brain. And then when they get older, if you think again about gender roles, that girl job is to be overly sexualized, and boys grow up believing that their jobs are to be the conquerors. Next. So I call that the Homer Simpson brain. Become less sensitive to pain and suffering, more fearful of the world, more likely to behave in aggressive or harmful ways. And I've seen this in children. I've seen parents catching their kids playing Grand Theft Auto. Actually not catching, that's the wrong word, allowing their kids to play Grand Theft Auto at the age of 10 and 11. And I saw a friend who tried to set limits with her daughter. Okay, you've been on there for 4 hours. We've got company. Come sit down and have dinner with us. And the 10-year-old stood up and started wailing on her mother because how dare she stop her from playing this violent video game. So a lot of everything that I'm sharing with you is based in fact and research, and also sadly bolstered by my own personal experiences of having to do this work for a long time. So people's thinking gets restricted, and also gets very egocentric, right? It's more about me and getting my needs met. We also lose empathy. We lose that compassion towards other human beings because of that desensitization. And it reduces emotional reactivity to real life exposure. So they might be hyper vigilant, they might be overreactive, or flat affect. So they may not even react to horrific things that they're seeing. To further demonstrate our violent culture, these are the Sigma Nu students hung these out during freshman day. Go ahead and drop off mom too. So go ahead, you can just click through the next slide, Amy. You can just go slowly, give time to digest a little bit, but don't necessarily need you to traumatize us. Sorry. And I hate showing these. I truly do hate showing these, but I think it's really important. And you'll see in a moment, there's actually a picture from a sorority. So what happens is, even though if we can't burn them, join them, right? Burn our couches so you can sit on our faces. So that's an indication of where we grow up hypersexualized. Go ahead, click again. So these are some t-shirts that used to be sold on Amazon. And this is the beautiful thing about the power of consumership. Places like Amazon, they don't actually look at what they're selling. We can really sell almost anything. And unless somebody complains, then they'll review it and decide to take it down. So these are shirts that were up for a little while. 2 beers, $7, 3 margaritas, $15, 4 Jello shots, $20, taking home the girl who drank all these above priceless. I raped the bar exam. We should never take a word that should send shivers down your spine, that should make you sick to know that somebody's experienced that, and turn it into a positive. So when they say I raped the bar exam, that means I conquered it, right? And then it's not a snuggle struggle. It's not a rape, it's a snuggle with a struggle. So these are promoting sexual violence. And these did come down, but didn't come down quick enough for me not to grab them off their website. And then in memes, don't wrap it and tap it, tape her and rape her. It's not rape, it's another struggle. Rohypnol, it's a Rohypnol, which is a drug often used for sexually assaulting somebody. And mind you, these memes show up on social media. They show up on any type of, whether it's Facebook or Snapchat or whatever. And unfortunately, parents are signing their kids up. I have a daughter-in-law who signed up her children the moment they were born because she was afraid that their names wouldn't be available by the time they grew up. But I'm not going to let them use it, she'd say. And then by the time they were 10 years old, she was letting them go on. And we know social media, it's a great way to connect people, but it's also a great way to connect to people who are vulnerable. So why is sexual violence a silent epidemic? Go ahead and click. And I call these the why bother factors, right? So mistrust of institutions, whether it's medical, there's so many people who have what my doctor calls the white coat syndrome. So the moment they see somebody in a white coat, their blood pressure goes up and they get really scared because, you know, for some people, medical stuff can be scary. Some people may have an aversion to court or police because maybe they've gotten themselves in trouble in the past, or they've seen where something didn't go right. And just the fact that they've gotten in trouble in the past doesn't mean that they don't deserve support if they've been sexually assaulted. And school personnel. We see this especially in colleges, where there's a constant battle around Title IX and keeping campuses safe. And the regulations change often with different administrations. And so that might make it either confusing or untrustworthy to go to somebody on campus and say, I need help. Some people know that there's long drawn out court proceedings, or if they do get to the court process, they do find out quickly. The shortest case I've ever been able to support somebody on is 9 months, and that was the shortest I've ever, and it was an election year. The longest I've seen actually never ended. It's still swirling around, and it's been in the process for over 12 years. So think about it. You've experienced their trauma. And sadly, a lot of people feel their healing is set aside to get through this court, with all these legal stuff. And if somebody believes that, and the court is going on now for 10, 12, 15 years, that's a lot of time staying stuck in that traumatic space. Deportation, and that's regardless of their status. So somebody might be documented, but they may not be. And whether they are or not, if somebody's an immigrant or a refugee, then oftentimes perpetrators will use that as a tool to quiet somebody. Either it's a boss where they're earning wages under the table. And so they'll scare them, well, I'm not going to get in trouble. You're going to be the one to get in trouble. And other times it could be, well, you know, this country doesn't like troublemakers. So if you go to the police, they're going to call you a troublemaker and find a way to get rid of you. So these are tactics often used to keep people quiet. Then reaction by first responders and others. First responders are grown up in the same culture as the rest of us. And unless they've gone through a training like this to help them understand the dynamics of sexual violence, then, you know, I've heard this sadly. Well, why did you go there? Why were you alone? Don't you know that women shouldn't be walking alone? Don't you know you shouldn't be hanging around bad guys? Again, finding reasons why somebody was the cause of their own victimization. And if somebody was mugged or standing at an ATM taking money out and somebody stole their money, we're not going to say, oh, what were you doing at the ATM? Oh my God, you were flashing money out? We wouldn't do that. We don't do it with most other crimes. And this is shocking to a lot of people. Not a lot of people know that what happened was illegal. Part of it is because of the own victim blaming of themselves because of misconceptions in society. But they don't realize that if they get drunk, somebody doesn't have a right to touch them. And there's a lot of nuances in sexual violence that, you know, people think, oh, that's worse than this. And this didn't happen to me. So I guess, you know, I'm just stupid for feeling the way I feel. But the big one not being believed, again, it's a lot of that victim blaming, or there's still this misconception in culture that most people are going to lie about their victimization. A lot of people have no memory, whether it's because they were intoxicated or they had an injury, or because the trauma was just so strong and so bad that their brain is protecting them from remembering the fine details. And then the biggest one is retaliation. One of the things that I've seen more and more over the years is perpetrators will steal licenses, will steal phones and say, I know where you live. I have your keys. I have your phone. I will ruin your life. And they may even use that phone to record the incident. I'm going to put it up on social media. I'm going to put it up on the internet and call it pornography. And people are going to think you did this consensually. And I've worked with so many survivors over the years who, when something's up on the internet, it's so hard and next to impossible to take it down. And because somebody could click on that and download it. So suddenly you have 1 million people downloading a file. There's no way to get them off of everybody's computers. So your victimization, the crime that you experience, this very intimate crime, is now out there publicly for others to see. Next slide. So after sexual violence, I want to talk a little bit about how victims and survivors might present, and then talk about, you know, if I could live in my perfect world and all survivors were believed, we can talk a little bit about how that might change the trauma for somebody. And by the way, a lot of this, the conversation about trauma itself is transferable. Although sexual violence is a particularly heinous crime, and not all crimes are terrible, but they're not necessarily this intimate type of crime. But the way trauma sits in our brain is the same. Our brains don't know, they just know trauma. And so hopefully this will be helpful for other situations too. Okay, next. That's all right, Amy. So again, sexual violence is a heinous crime. It's intimate. It makes us uncomfortable in society because despite our hypersexualized media that's out there in this country, we're still afraid to talk about good sex. We don't want to talk to kids about healthy sexuality because, I don't know, it might make them gay, might make them want to go out and have sex, is a lot of the misconceptions that we feel in society. I'm a firm believer, by the way, you're going to hear this more from Jen, that healthy sexuality conversations, age appropriately, but throughout a child's lifetime, is a key to stopping the victimization, because perpetrators are not going to want to victimize a kid who understands about their body, who understands the actual names of their body parts, who understands that their body is theirs and nobody has a right to touch it. So if we can do that, then we're going to stop a lot of the crimes from happening. But again, think about media and games and movies and how those desensitize. The victim blaming by society that doesn't happen in most other crimes. The abuse of power and control. And I use that honestly, most rape crisis centers said this, rape is about power and control. And then I was in a training once, talking to a young woman, saying, I never want to be in a place of power because, oh my gosh, that will hurt everybody. And then I had to realize I had to change my rhetoric. I had to change what I was saying, because power in the right hands does beautiful things. So I had to start realizing it's the abuse of power. And it affects survivors intimately, sexually, and physically. Okay, next. So just very quickly, I think we probably have heard this many times, but it doesn't hurt to revisit what trauma is. It's an emotional response to a very terrible thing, like sexual violence. And right after sexual violence, somebody could experience shock, fear, denial. This didn't happen. This person, no way. I trust this person. No way they could have done this. I might have been, should have been, or probably is culpable in some way. I don't know how, but I'm sure I did something to anger them, right? Hoping the feelings and memories will just go away. And one of the things that we do at the agency is accompaniment. So we'll meet somebody at the hospital, at the emergency room, at the police station right after an assault. So we see a lot of folks right in the very beginning. And all these things are things that they worry about. What did I do wrong? How did they get so mad at me that they did this to me? Why did they set me up like this? Worried that they're not going to be believed. They take the chance of going to the emergency room, hoping they'll be believed, but expecting not to be believed. So there's a lot of people that should be going to the emergency room to be checked out that don't go. And so a lot of people end up with pregnancies that they didn't want, or STD or STI that they weren't expecting to have to deal with now. And there's, after time has passed, so after the initial shock of what happened passes, it doesn't go away. Somebody's still living in that traumatic space. That emotions could be unpredictable, unregulated. They could be having flashbacks and triggers that they don't understand unless they've talked to a therapist or a rape crisis counsel that helps them understand what flashbacks are, what triggers are. It impacts relationships. I can't tell you how many times we get calls from partners like, it's been 3 months, why don't they have sex with me now? And also they isolate. And especially during this time, isolation is huge. And unfortunately, it's happening on a much greater rate. Because when you're sexually assaulted by somebody you thought you trusted, or even by a stranger, the world becomes very unsafe. You don't know what to think, who to trust, where to go. And so the instinct is just hide away. And survivors may even experience physical symptoms like headaches and nausea. And there's things now that somebody who has experienced a long time abuse may have things like, back issues, headaches, migraines, neurological disorders, all kinds of things. There's also a lot, I've seen where somebody's body's physically just not able to do what they need to do because the trauma just integrates in all parts of your body. So surviving a traumatic event, and go ahead and click, doesn't mean the survivor's okay. Right? So a lot of people say, oh, you passed this, you got the medication, you got the forensics, you reported to the police, you've done all you need to do, get over it. But that's not how it works. If I break my arm, I'm not going to get over it. My body needs to heal that arm in order for me to be able to use the arm again. And then maybe the break is such a way that it'll never feel quite right. I might need physical therapy after that to get the arm working better. And that's the same for survivors of sexual violence. Go ahead. So surviving a traumatic event, it's important to understand that in that moment, we're not clear thinking. We're not using the power part of our brain. We're not saying, okay, so this is happening and this is my plan and this is how I'm going to get out. No, we're using a much different part of our brain. The survival instinct kicks in. So decision making might not seem rational. The planning isn't deliberate. It's in the moment. What can I do now? Okay, this didn't work. What can I do now? If they're not freezing, by the way. And oops, sorry, I got to go back. I lost my screen. There we go. The important thing is, a lot of us, if we're talking to somebody who's experienced a trauma, we're looking at that with our logical, non-trauma, in the moment brains. And we can't judge somebody for what they've done because they did what they need to do to survive, whether that's freezing, whether that's fighting, whether that's trying to run away from the situation. I have to say, though, when that happens, people often get hurt even worse. So here's the rub. Our bodies and brains adapt to that trauma by the world becoming very unsafe. We develop anticipatory patterns that will protect us from this happening again, whether there's a risk for it or not. We talk often about physical safety, and we equate for that, we plan for that. But for sexual assault survivors, so long as they're out of that relationship, out of that situation, it's emotional safety. They've already planned for the next time this is going to happen, whether there's a risk for it or not. We just kind of get into that hard set place. So our bodies and emotions will still respond to people, even good people, in a way that is if there's danger. So somebody might giving a report to the police, and if that police just, sometimes they have to ask tough questions, and we have to help them put those questions in context, that this is about an investigation. And so sometimes the question, well, what were you doing there? Might feel like, what were you doing there? Right? And so that can be a trigger for somebody. So they might start yelling at that officer, telling them they're disrespectful, and the officer may not understand why this person is reacting this way. So one of the things, I do a training similar to this to a lot of police officers around our area to help them understand that. Exactly, Jen, right. COVID has exacerbated so much of this. So this is the living legacy of trauma. The post experience is this living legacy of trauma. And I didn't coin that phrase, but I love it. And so the next slide will show, hopefully dramatically, what that looks like. So this is from Janina Fisher, who I just love and has done so much work around trauma and the trauma in the brain. And so here's your traumatic experience. And all those things surround it are the post-trauma reactions that sadly people get judged for. Because again, we want to hold this type of trauma differently from others. So if you look at loss of sense of the future, hopelessness, emotional, overwhelming, fear of or no memories, right? Chronic pain, headaches. So this is the legacy of trauma. This is what survivors endure. Okay, next slide. So I love this. It's from Lieutenant Munford from the Michigan State Police Department, and in a comment that was made in regards to the Larry Nassar case. And so remember, this is coming from an officer. A trauma-informed approach begins with understanding the physical, social, and emotional impact of trauma on the individual. It includes an understanding of the neurobiological impact of trauma and how specific experiences impact victim trauma, memory, and behavior. And I think we all have a role in that, in creating that system where survivors' feelings and fears and triggers can be held safely by all of us. Okay, next slide. So here's my very strange picture of the brain. It's very colorful. I wish my brain really looked that colorful, but I guarantee it doesn't. So if you click Amy, so that's the area where memories, traditional memories, are stored. And that's where emotions are stored. So very simply, and I am not a neurobiologist, so in no way am I pretending to be a neurobiologist. I can only do it in Heidi simple language. But when we experience a trauma, and that trauma is strong and pervasive and sometimes over time, but one event can create this as well, that because there's so much emotions involved with that experience, the memories get misfiled. So it's like we take a file and don't put it back where it belongs, we put it out of order. So we're looking for the M file, but the M file doesn't exist because somehow it's over in Z, right? So that's what happens with trauma. If they aren't stored in the right place, that also makes it very hard for somebody to give a statement, especially in the first 24 to 48 hours, because their brain is still in that trauma space, still in that emotional space. And some great officers are out there doing multiple. So they do the initial conversation, and then they'll follow up a couple more times to slowly work with the individual to see what memories might be coming up after time. And in some states too, if an officer discharges their gun, they're sent home before they write the report to sleep on it for a day or two. Understanding, so in some states, they understand the trauma of shooting that gun. No officer should ever want to shoot that gun. So when you shoot that gun, it causes trauma for them. So instead of writing the report right away, when they know the memories are all in that emotional place, they let them have two nights or more of sleep before they write the report. So those memories have time to refile. They have time to do wellness, self-care, and the memories get to refile. Next slide. So traumatic memories, because of the misfiling, delays disclosures. The memories are in pieces. It's like a puzzle that isn't put together. So it causes barriers to recording. And imagine if Amy said to us, okay, after Heidi talks, after Jen, after Sabrina talks, we're going to have a test, but you only can take that test on little scraps of paper. And imagine we were all together. But then she's going to turn on a big fan and blow all those notes around. So you can't now study. That's like a trauma brain, right? We don't have all the papers in order. Next slide. And so again, the memories not stored in the same part of the brain as regular memories, right? Memories become disjointed, disorganized. They're not linear. So they might be able to say the end piece, maybe something from the middle. But if you ask me if the person was wearing a red shirt or a blue shirt, whether their hair was black, brown, or white, or their eyes blue, green, or brown, I may not remember that. But if there's a gun involved, I'm going to remember in great detail the shiny black gun that pointed at my face, because the memories are stored in the emotional center, and that gun was really scary. But in time, and this is where we all have a role with supportive systemic interventions. So that means culturally we get together. And I love that these trainings happen and have been happening for a very long time, because I think Worcester and surrounding towns are getting really aware around trauma and the impact of it and how serious this impacts our communities and welfare, and with adequate and supportive responses. So instead of the, what were you wearing? Or why did you go there? What did you drink? Or why did you take those drugs? Where, I'm sorry this happened to you. I believe you. You didn't deserve this. Those supportive responses. And that's from institutions, whether it's a school, whether it's a police department, whether it's City Hall, whether it's your mom, dad, or friends, right? Along with counseling and or therapeutic interventions, that we believe healing is possible. Let's talk about healing for a little bit though. Healing doesn't mean that everything is going back to normal. So let's take this pandemic. We're all waiting for normality to return, right? That's one thing I hear several times a day. Well, when we get back to normal, we're never going back to the way we were. And I hope we don't go back to the way we were. Going through this pandemic has shown how resilient we are, shown how clever we can be, because we all figured out how to continue doing these trainings, doing the work, supporting survivors, supporting loved ones, using technology. We can't dial that back. Everything that we've learned, we can't dial back. The fear that we're feeling because we're in the midst of a pandemic, we'll always remember that. And let's hope we do, because there's learning that can happen. There's growth that can happen. And that's the same thing for survivors. So why it matters, every criminal justice system, and this is specific to the criminal justice system, every criminal justice system interaction has the potential to either help or hurt a sexual assault survivor. Every interaction can either support that victim's healing or cause them to be re-traumatized. And that's Becky Campbell, who's also done a lot of work around neurobiology and trauma. And this is the truth. So if we have really great responses, if the first person that survivor discloses to says, I believe you, you didn't deserve this, that individual is already on the healing journey. If the response is, you shouldn't have done that, you're so stupid, I told you not to be drinking, I told you not to hang around those people, you're walking down an alleyway without your keys in your hand to defend yourself, what's wrong with you? Those reactions re-traumatize and continue to perpetuate the trauma for an individual. And again, that's true for any type of trauma, but unfortunately, there's specific, unique situations on how we treat survivors. So if someone discloses, just listen and validate. Even if you're in a position where you have to do an interview, the first time you connect with them, just listen and validate. Give them that space. Understand that the memories in the brain need to be refiled in order to be able to have a meaningful conversation with an individual. And to try to force that conversation before that happens is going to, again, further the trauma for that individual. Believe them. In all this time, there was only one incident, and I've supported thousands of survivors in over 20 years. There's only one incident where somebody said to me, yeah, I don't know what was wrong with me. I made that up. I was just so mad at them. Only one in the thousands of people I've supported over the years. And I can live with that. I can say, yep, I believed you, and shame on you for compromising that relationship, but it's not on me. So I don't have to feel bad about that. I feel bad about them that they would feel that they needed to make up that story. And that's a whole other conversation down the road. But believe them. If it turns out that it not to be true, so what? Not so what for them, but so what for you? What does that do to us? So we believe somebody. That's a good thing. And remind them that it's not their fault. Say things like, if they say, I shouldn't have been alone with them, because that's something that's probably already been said or will be said to them by somebody. Remind them that trusting somebody is not a crime and is not an excuse for somebody to hurt you. Trust never should be. And then I love this quote from C.S. Lewis: you can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending. And we all have a role in changing the ending for survivors. We all have a role, and this is a big burden, but we all have a role of whether somebody starts their healing or is further traumatized. Next slide. So this is my last slide for now, and then we're going to have Sabrina come on. But I just wanted to make sure that we have free and confidential support we have 2 hotlines. One is the 800 hotline, and the other one is a video phone. And they're both free and confidential, and they both provide 24/7 support. And we also have accompaniment. We call it medical, legal, court advocacy, but it's not advocacy in the sense that we're speaking for the individual. We help them navigate and help them understand the process and provide emotional support, because who doesn't need that going through institutions? But we also are there to provide support for professionals and provide resources. And again, all our counselors are well-trained in this unique role of being rape crisis counselors. And I can personally vouch for that for our Worcester Rape Crisis Center, because I oversee a lot of the counselors. So now I'm going to take a break from talking, and I'm going to invite Sabrina. And Sabrina has with her our valuable interpreters. So I want to thank them for joining us today too. And Sabrina has some really important things to say about deaf survivors and how to support them. So thank you, and I'll see you in a little bit.
Okay. So I'm Sabrina Glover, and I'm the Assistant Director of the Deaf Service Program here at Pathways. Deaf Survivors Program, excuse me. And it's been awesome to work here. I think maybe there's about 40 minutes left. And I know Jen has a lot of important things to say as well. So I'm going to try and keep myself up to maybe 10 minutes. I'm going to try. I'm going to do my best. So if you have any questions, please go ahead and type that in the chat. And we'll go ahead, and if there's time, I can answer those questions. So let me just get right to it. My Deaf Survivors Program provides the same type of services that Pathway, except that our survivors are in the state, the whole state. We cover the entire state of Massachusetts, Western Mass to Boston to Cape Cod. We cover the whole state. And we have our own separate hotline. So we use a video phone, and that's done through video in order to talk and support our survivors, and our survivors who want to talk to one of our counselors who uses sign. We also use American Sign Language. And other than that, we do the same services as Pathway, except that we provide it in American Sign Language. So any group of survivors or communities or anyone who has want to hear about like a deaf individual who has special needs of some kind, they can, the whole deaf community is not the same. There's a variety of things, and each deaf person is a different individual with different backgrounds, social economic status, educational levels, different things like that. And they have a variety of, they may have other disabilities on top of being deaf. We have some deaf individuals who are culturally deaf, some that are mainstream schooled, some that are in different type of group. So we're not all the same. All deaf people are not the same, just like all white people aren't the same. We're all not the same. So two things to specifically consider is the deaf blind population and the deaf people who have other disabilities that to meet their needs. That comes up often. So part of the point is with communication and with language, that's a necessity. The deaf community is unique because, you know, it's not just a disabled group. There's linguistic things that run underlining on that too, and it inputs their linguistic level and their language level. And so you have to approach both of them in different manners. The deaf community, linguistics depends on the individual, what they're comfortable with, and what they choose to use, what their background was like. There's a variety of things. So those individuals may prefer to speak, or they may prefer to lip read, or, you know, it's separate. Then speaking and lip reading is a separate thing. Like I depend on American Sign Language, and I use that as my first language. And some deaf blind people, they may use what's called protactile, PT for short, protactile sign. And I don't know if you are familiar with that, but that's, I can expand a little bit on that. It is actual American Sign Language with modifications to fit on the body so that the person either will hold hand over hand or somebody will hold them at their shoulders. And there's different types of communication in that area. They may tap, they may rub, and they may use expressing in their own way. And then there's tactile, which is sign. And they may have limited visual. They may be blind, but can see some. And then they use sign maybe really close to them, or they hold the other person's hand and feel the signs. And some deaf individuals really just prefer to write back and forth. It varies on the person, or maybe typing. It's such a wide range, and it depends on the individual and their situation. And all are valid things to do. There's no one method of communication. And some do one way better than the other. It depends on the individual. And we want to meet them at their need, not at ours, right? And the deaf community does have their own cultures and norms and expectations. And they have, you know, they may be disabled upon their hearing loss, but they have linguistic needs and there's culture there. So it's mixed. If some deaf people may prefer more eye contact, facial expression, maybe a necessity to read more, or they may be more physical in how they move their body. And that's how they use their self to communicate. Some, just like a hearing person uses their tone, your facial expression and body is shown in the deaf community, how someone is feeling in the tone of that person. And it is okay to tap somebody on the shoulder or wave at them. That's okay. Just don't, it's not rude. It's not considered rude. That's how you're going to get somebody's attention who is deaf. So communicate, they may have language deprivation. They may have a little delay in their processing. So it's better to not get frustrated, or if they see you and they are misunderstood, they may feel frustrated. So, you know, they've lived with it daily. So if we have patience for that, that's important. And just to give them kindness and grace to understand and the impact of what they feel, and also accept what they need. You know, we have to meet them at their level. And in stressful situations, especially sexual violence or trauma, and they've already explained it so many times, and they have to go through it again. That's another thing they put on top, as well as explaining it, and they're deaf. So oftentimes people don't understand what that's like. So there's a lot of overlapping things that do happen or to take into consideration. The next slide would be great. Yes, thank you. So system prevention, Heidi already mentioned this in the previous in her slides. Then a lot of people with domestic violence as well and having experience, and even worse, if they're deaf or hard of hearing, there's least places to report, or they feel they can't report that. And, they have to identify the language barriers there. If they have to get an ASL interpreter, not everyone will provide it. And if they don't get that, they won't understand. And a lot of people are not patient, and they try to gesture back and forth with somebody, but they not often the deaf person will feel like, what's the point of being here and seeking help, because they're not going to understand me. I have nothing accessible to me. So they may feel that way. There's a lot of people who are not reporting. And if you imagine the barriers in the system, based on people's perceptions, even the deaf people, they assume that, oh, they're deaf and they're a deaf community. They can't, you can't make sense. You don't know what you're talking about. They assume that of the deaf community. And the deaf community all along has been lacking with confidentiality. And it's a majority of things that happen that get set up, like even in their own family. The educational system, oftentimes things are lacking with information, lacking access and services, educating people. And if the barriers continue and then leads to, it's already been on them and they feel oppressed, and then they feel that something's wrong with them. There must be something wrong with me, they'll often think. I don't deserve help. I don't deserve services. That's often, I'm a burden to these people. So that's also included with that feeling of oppression, and there's no self-esteem, that I don't deserve it, I should know better. So healing isn't recognized, and they just are affected by this trauma. And they won't sometimes even recognize they do need help because they weren't taught to, what does that look like? What's your experience? They were taught a different way growing up, so they think they don't deserve any of that. In the medical and legal, the court system, the hospitals, they don't see an interpreter. They don't have them automatically ready. They have captioning services, but it's a request that needs to have a interpreter, and sometimes it takes a while to get somebody there. They don't have someone right at the ready to, so the Rape Crisis Center and domestic violence shelters, anywhere doesn't have, for the public, doesn't have access and ready for a deaf person to jump in and get heard. So there's a lot of stuff that's needed. So that's an added layer to their frustration of the oppressed, the people that feel oppressed already. And my last point would be, the deaf community is very small. So if the abuser is deaf also, and then the deaf community knows them, they support each other. And then the survivor doesn't get supported. But everybody already knows the society and what it's like, and that's unfortunate. And it applies to the deaf community too, just like any society, but it's small. And then even the smaller community causes more risk. You lose friends or peers if they defend the person that was the abuser, or if they find out, they might be embarrassed or ashamed and fearful that they won't be heard. So that's least likely they won't report their abuse or anything to that. So there's a suffering that happens. And then the next slide, I thought I saw, is there another part for the presentation? I don't know if it's still on the screen. Did I share it?
I don't know what I think I stopped my screen share. Sorry about that. I think,
Oh, no, it's okay. I would just like for you to see the PowerPoint. I think I'm on task here for access.
Practicing allyship? Is that the one?
Accommodations and accessibility.
There it is. Sorry.
Yeah, there it is.
Right? It's good. It's where it's supposed to be. Yeah.
So accommodations and accessibility. It's important to be aware of what accommodations you need. You know, there's a lot of technology out there for the deaf can use to have an interpreter. Don't assume that they all have one type of communication. Not all use American Sign Language, but if they do, you can get an interpreter. And ASL has its own different practices, and also the point of being set up, they're setting that up to have interpreters prepared. And there's what's called a certified deaf interpreter. That's when the deaf individual or survivor, there has a hearing interpreter and then a deaf interpreter also. And you may wonder, why would I need a deaf interpreter and a hearing interpreter? Oftentimes what happens is they have to be culturally aware. A CDI, a certified deaf interpreter, can accommodate and match the deaf person, being that ASL is their first language also. And the person who is the survivor may not have a clear base of language and needs the CDI to interpret what's going on and to clarify for them because it's their first language. And they may be from another country and they almost sign ASL, but they don't exactly. They have a little bit of other kinds. So a deaf interpreter could help clarify because they're both deaf. And so they're able to clarify with each other, then can tell the hearing interpreter, who can then interpret what's going on. And those are just examples of why we need a CDI in some cases. And then, like I talked before about the protactile sign for a deafblind person, they use that. And they have a specific interpreter to help in that manner also. And sometimes there's also a voice interpreter, which is interesting too. Some people are hard of hearing, or they only grew up speaking and they don't know any sign language at all. And so they may need help to someone be directly next to them so they could hear in their ear or pick up the tone that they can hear more of than just in general if you're too far away. And then you could having someone right there at their ear, and they may need that. It depends on the situation and who the person is. They do have interpreters for that in those special areas too. Some people prefer and don't want an interpreter. They'll tell you that. And that's their they want captioning maybe, or they want the CART service, and they want just direct communication by pen and paper. It's up to the individual. They may not want a third party involved. You just have to respect their wishes and what they choose and follow them and what their preferences are. This is just having access to reasonable accommodations. So we have a donation program, like smoke alarms, doorbells with light alarms, baby crier that can tell when the baby's crying. And we have different type, if needed, those different type of accommodations. And we are, loaning that out and starting, we have to start over for the new place somebody might need, so we can give them and help them with that. What I really want to emphasize about an interpreter though, this interpreter must be certified, licensed certified. You cannot have a friend or a family member or even the police, if they know sign language, they're like, oh, I sign. It doesn't matter. It has to be a certified. That's with a lawyer. That's with a police officer. It doesn't matter who they are. And they say they know sign language. It must be a certified legal interpreter when it involves legal, as well as certified anywhere else of an interpreter. And you'd be surprised that people are like, oh, no, I don't want to interpret. I'd rather my good friend interpret for me, or I'd rather my brother interpret for me. They may say that. Even if they say that, you have to say no, because legally, if legal is involved and police are involved, you have to have a certified legal interpreter to go through and through an agency and make sure that it's a real certified legal interpreter. We do have 3 large interpreting agencies in Massachusetts. It's Massachusetts Commission on the Hard of Hearing, MCDHH. We have Learning Center for the Deaf, and then we also have partners, which is they call PI for short. Those are the 3 agencies, and they're great resources to get an interpreter or a captioner. you can contact any of them, and then you'd be able to meet the person's need of whatever they choose. And actually, so again, my point is there are different type of preferences and different needs. So don't just assume that, oh, they must need an interpreter or they must need this, because not all deaf people are the same. And other accessibilities they may need, you know, you have to make sure you see what they prefer, make sure you ask, what do you prefer, and follow their request. That's what's very important. And next slide. So allyship. Always ask which way they prefer to communicate. That's important. And then provide what they prefer. So you need to have your resources ready. Just know who you need to contact so when you're asked. And then you'll see which one will work best and be familiar, and so that they know you're aware. You need to know where the referrals are and where to refer all through the state. There are services specifically for deaf survivors. We cover the whole state, but you need to know where that is, what agency, so they have contact information and have that resource ready so that time for the survivor doesn't go on too long searching for services. That's not meeting their needs. So if you know where and when, you know where to refer them. That's important also. And know how to request an interpreter. And advocate for the deaf and hard of hearing individuals. When they see you advocating, it doesn't mean they're getting oppressed and don't speak for them. That's not what I mean. What I mean is find what they need, what they require, recognize what's missing. Give them the platform to stand on it and go from there, and give them the space to be heard, and they will then speak up for themselves. So that's my part. I kept it short and sweet, I hope. I didn't want to take up too much time. I know Jen has a lot of things to cover. So if you have any questions or you want to know more, feel free to contact me anytime. I think Heidi has all my information is in there too at the end of this presentation. So I appreciate the time and letting me speak. Thank you all so much. Okay, Jen, it's your turn now.
Sorry for any missed slides. I don't know that I lined it all up all right, but you are awesome.
Thank you, Sabrina. Thank you. I'll give it to Jen now.
Hi. Okay. Yeah, my name is Jen. I'm the Disabilities Advocate here at Pathways for Change and counselor. So I was just going to go a little bit over survivors with IDD or intellectual or developmental disabilities. So hopefully I can try to make this fast as well, but keeping in mind the interpreters are speed signing. So this is the statistics out there range depending on where you're getting your information, but astronomically high for this community. 7 to 9 out of 10 people with developmental disabilities will be sexually abused in their lifetime. And of the ones that are sexually abused, half of those people will be abused 10 or more times in their lifetime. And how it's kind of broken down depending on where you're looking for the information. 80% women of the people who will be victimized, 80% of women, 30% of men. And there's very little information regarding, transgender survivors with IDD, non-binary. But we know that these figures are very, very high. So some of the risks there, people in this community are at very high risk. There's many reasons why. One of the main reasons why is many in this community, they rely on caregivers for some of their daily personal, like hygiene, dressing, bathing, toileting. And on top of that, they're not often, like Heidi had mentioned earlier, not often provided with much needed healthy sexuality or relationship education that's age appropriate or developmentally appropriate education. And it results in some people not understanding that the abuse is wrong, even if it hurts. They use the wrong language for body parts, which can make it kind of hard to even report sometimes. And not understanding that they have the right to have boundaries. I kind of call it a boundary bias. We're allowed to have boundaries, but certain people that we care for aren't allowed the same boundaries or just human rights, basically civil rights. And also for society often infantilizes folks with IDD. So they, wrongly think that they're asexual. I'm sure that there are some asexual people with IDD out there. However, a lot of people just wrongly think that they're asexual beings out there and unable to have healthy sexual relationships. And they're also not believed when they do speak up. So go ahead and next slide. And there are barriers, and see, these barriers are the same with pretty much any survivor, but times 100, basically. They have the fear, they have the shame, not understanding what happened to them was a crime. And again, that falls back, for me anyway, to not having that education available to everyone. Not knowing the process of reporting, how to report and to who. Right now, Heidi and I are working with Mass Advocate Standing Strong to create a training to, like, what do you do when someone does disclose to you? How to act, how to refer them to the right people that will help them. Even working with VRLC, or Victims' Rights Law Center, making accessible language or plain language for even what, a courtroom would look like, or what a criminal proceeding would look like. So it's not so scary. The more education you have on something, the easier it is to see your place in it. And then support people. Support people can be anybody from family to caregivers, just anybody that you constantly have a relationship with, whether it's professional or personal. They might not understand the full impact of sexual trauma, like Heidi was alluding to before. So sound familiar? Yeah, with most survivors, these are often very similar things. Yeah. So then there's social sabotage that goes on, the isolation. Heidi had mentioned that earlier too. Lack of community, infantilization. I can never say this word, I am so sorry, because it's a word that shouldn't happen. But anyway, treating adults like children. And then the age-appropriate or developmentally inappropriate sexual education. Boundary awareness. It is okay to have boundaries. Lack of belief and inadequate, and okay, this part's important. Lack of belief and inadequate investigative procedures. There are some, we're lucky in Worcester that we do have sexual assault police officers that are trained, trauma-informed and then trained to investigate, and they know how to ask the right questions and how. But not every community has that. But lack of belief when they're disclosing to you, do leave the questions up to the authorities, because sometimes without you knowing it, when you're asking questions, it can sound to a survivor like you're accusing them of doing something wrong, even though it's just a question to figure out what's going on. And again, not understanding one's body parts. And then this part's important. They don't have consistent tracking of offending caregivers, but there is a change recently that happened. Go ahead. So this part's really exciting. So the abuse registry bill, they now have, and there's a phone number here. So in 2020, Massachusetts enacted a law requiring the DPPC to establish and maintain a registry of care providers against whom the DPPC has made a substantial finding of registrable abuse. So the DPPC every year gets around 250 substantiated claims. And this is called Nikki, but basically Nikki's Law, where they found a loophole where people would just be able to find jobs still as caregivers. But this registry allows just the substantial accusation, basically, even if they're not prosecuted. Before, they would have to be prosecuted to be able to be on any type of list. But this allows to kind of get through that loophole. It was effective just this year, just a couple of weeks ago. And of course, it's intended to protect individuals with IDD. And then barring care providers who have a substantiated finding of registrable abuse from working with other persons with intellectual or developmental disabilities, because there was a way before you would leave this company, be able to go to this company because there was no prosecution against you, and it just continues and continues. Yeah. Go ahead with the next one. Final thoughts. So compliancy. I've heard someone say compliancy is violence, which I believe is true. A lot of people in the IDD community are taught from a very young age to just be compliant with everything. So, but there comes a time where, I mean, everybody's body is their own. And so having compliancy and having your own autonomy are two different things. So in order to do this, we need to be able to teach people, everybody, their own barriers, their own rights, and no means no. And again, it goes down to education, education, education. And it's very, very important to allow all survivors, including folks with IDD, the choices after they are abused. I know a lot of people go into the mode of protection and want to make choices for them, but that's one of the biggest healing, other than being believed, is making your own choices, own informed choices, because your choices were taken away from you during this event. And two of the big things that I've learned, patience and creativity. Those are the two biggest things. So, empowering someone with IDD, that's huge. You use accessible and plain language all the time. Find out where their communication style is, and get fit to their level. Recognize silences as what they are and can be. Silences could be them processing something. It could also be them not understanding what you just fully said. So checking in for understanding is very important with this community. And lastly, respect their uniqueness. This is a real way that you can build rapport with any survivor. And, just kind of putting it out there, we are trying to get together a healing group or a group, folks with IDD. So we're just kind of putting that information out there that we really would love to start a group healing circle with some survivors here. And that's my piece. I think we're back to Heidi.
Thank you, Sabrina. Thank you, Sabrina. Thank you, Jen. You guys are fabulous, and I love working with you both. So just real quick, just a brief overview. Who we support are survivors. We also support significant others, so long as they're non-offending. And professionals, and a lot of people don't get that. We get so many calls to our hotline, so many calls to me from professionals saying, what if? But also, I need support because I just worked with this individual and I'm triggered. And that's okay. Because one of the things that we've learned in this work for sustainability is our own self-care, our own wellness, and making sure that we have some good stuff in place. Next slide. So all our services, our counseling services, are free and confidential. Again, we have the accompaniment and that the medical and the police are 24/7 services in the court. We just need a few days advance warning. Those are our hotline numbers. So we've got the voice hotline, which is 800, and the video phone. And the video phone is there so individuals who speak ASL can talk to somebody in ASL, because we're far more comfortable talking in our own languages that are most comfortable for us than having to have an interpreter there. We also have Spanish and Portuguese speaking counselors as well. We provide face-to-face support groups and we call them healing circles. So I thank you, Jen, for introducing that. And our services are best fit for 11 and older. And sexual violence is a way, unfortunately, to age our kiddos real quick. So 11-year-olds, some may still be just emotionally too young for our empowerment model and might need more like play therapy. If somebody is, as we often say, old for their age, our services could work. We also have our deaf and hard of hearing services, our IDD and DD. Also sexual exploitation, because sexual exploitation is huge in Worcester. And I guarantee, and this is a whole other training, there is not one person out there on the streets being sold. And I say being sold because nobody's intentionally, meaningfully selling themselves because they feel like it. They're not on the street on their own decision. Something has happened in their lives to put them on that path. We also do, we have counselors embedded on some of our Worcester campuses, as well as teams. And one of the things we love to do is comprehensive referrals and resources. So we have a lot of folks who we view our role as expanding support systems and not being the end all and be all to everybody. But again, if you want these slides, so you can have these numbers, and if you can switch again, Amy, thank you so much. At the end, we'll have our emails, and just email me and I'm happy to send these out for you. Well done, my friends. We got through this technical problems, notwithstanding. We're here and we're open for any questions you may have. And if you have a question that you're not comfortable answering with other people here, feel free to give us a call. And sometimes I do my best thinking after I've seen a presentation, and an hour later that I'm like, darn it, I wish I asked that question. So keep our information handy. And if you aren't able to get this in time, Amy can give you my contact information because she has it. And she's a fabulous sharer.
I'll post it on our Facebook page, and then usually it's not right away, a couple days after we'll get the recording, and then we send that out to you guys. And I'm thrilled to hear, that you're going to send it out to other people. I think this is really, really important information. And I agree, people don't always know this information and they need to. So I wish a lot more people were here today, but I'm confident that this information is going to get shared and a lot of people will see it and know how to really better help or get somebody access to the help they need. I don't know if we didn't really have any specific questions that came up in the chat. People were sort of raising them as they went, and mostly it was more often comments. But yeah, if anybody has a question, feel free to jump right in. It's so much. I think it's
yeah. And we threw a lot at you in just a short amount of time, and I know it takes time to digest. And we pushed back on a lot of things too, such as society, and that is never a comfortable place to be in. Absolutely. But I do love what Jen said in particular, in that building awareness building understanding, educating people helps us then understand our role and our place in all of this. And I believe we all can do this and create a much better response for survivors of sexual violence and survivors of any type of violence.
Beautiful. That's such a nice, I'm like, oh, I have a question. And I hate to do that after you concluded it so beautifully, but right. Just was wondering if you could speak to at all how things have been through COVID. I know, we've all been a little bit fearful that people were stuck in situations that were unsafe or they didn't want to be in, but they didn't have the choices they might normally have. And if you saw a lot more calls or what kinds of things.
Yeah, we saw a lot more tougher situations. The trauma just set differently because it's compounded by the trauma we're all collectively going through. Yeah. But I was also terrified because there were so many closings. Some people misunderstood and thought everything was closed. Right. And so some of you might have seen us in community meetings posting in the chat, Pathways is still open. We're still here. Send people to us. Ask us for support. Ask us to educate. We're still here. So we did a lot of that. In fact, for the first time ever, we even put PSAs out, commercials out that aired across the states. So commercials, people tend to click off of them, but I'm hoping if we can just reach one person in an advertisement, then it's worth it.
Absolutely. I so appreciate that you did make all those connections between like personal experience, society, laws, legislation, and how awesome is that to see that legislation went up. I've definitely worked with people with disabilities, for decades, and so often they've been abused in caretaking settings, and seeing the results of that law that people continue to be able to get these jobs. So yay. I'm so grateful that we did something about that. That's really
absolutely. Important. And I think Rachel has a question, but I think she's having trouble. Rachel, can you type it, or are you able to?
Yeah, sorry, I'm here. Our dog is barking in the background. I apologize. The neighbors just showed up. But no, I just want to say too, I was doing a project for my leadership class this past semester, and during research, I learned from the RAIN website that in the year of COVID, from March of 2020 until April 2020, their calls went up 36% from people under the age of 21 years old.
Yeah.
I didn't entirely catch what she said because it said her bandwidth was low and she's bouncing in and out. But it sounded like she was talking about younger.
Sorry, can you guys hear me? I don't know if my thing is frozen.
Yeah, sorry, Rachel, I'm having trouble hearing you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, couldn't hear.
Can you guys hear me?
Oh, yeah, now we can. We didn't hear that statistic, though, I think, Rachel. Can you repeat what you were saying about the age?
Based on statistics from RAIN, from March of 2020 to April.
Oh.
No. No.
Rachel, can you type it in the chat?
Stop. That's okay. Can you guys hear me? Can you hear me now?
No.
Okay, so I was just saying that I was. Yes, absolutely. So, according to RAIN, during the year of COVID, from March of 2020 to April 2020, There are calls from people under the age of 21 years old, went up 36%.
Right.
I had heard that as well. Well, that younger people, and also that because of virtual school, there was a lot more sort of sibling and peer kind of happening. There weren't, there wasn't a lot of adult supervision necessarily. People were in front of computers the whole time anyways. Just so many challenging factors. If our audience isn't familiar with RAIN, that is a really great research partner. They keep good data and statistics on this stuff, right? Is that?
That was a great way to explain them, Amy, for sure. I love RAIN. I'm grateful there's a national platform, but what a lot of people don't understand is the counselors are us. They don't have actual counselors themselves on staff. They're more like an operating system to get survivors to the hotlines in the areas near them, which is precisely what they should be doing because we have the local resources. But they also do amazing research and fundraising, and so they're very great necessity. So in the chat, I put down my email and our office number, and we can do workshops for staff. We can do workshops for youth. We have a whole education outreach team that does a lot of youth workshops. We can do, lots of things. You just let us know what you need, and if it's related to sexual violence, we can show up for you.
Thank you so much. Pathways has really been doing the most amazing work since they started. It was probably decades ago that I did some work with Pathways, but they were all about social justice way back before social justice was something most people cared about. And it shows still that they're very mindful of the diversity of survivors and making sure that everyone has access to these supportive services, not just the people you would think would need it. So I guess we can close it out, especially since our tech stuff is kind of deteriorating.
But we made it. We made it.
We made it, and it was amazing. So much great information. So I'll be sharing that out, and Heidi Sue, I'll share your email and the number on the Facebook page. So if people want to get in touch with you after, they can. And again, we're so grateful for the work that you guys do, the hardest work. And I hope a lot more people take the time to really understand how this impacts people and what it's like, and just to be the most supportive community we can be.
Well, thank you, Amy, so much for inviting us. This was long overdue, and I'm so grateful to be here, and just how amazing we all for enduring the tech issues.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Be well.
It's great to
Bye-bye.
see you, Heidi.
Great to see you, sweetie. Be well. Hi, Jen. Hi, how you doing? Good. How are you? How are you?
Yeah, we need one for it. It's okay. And one for a house.
Yeah, it's a beautiful day for it. Oh my God. Oh. Right. Oh, yeah. That's so awesome. That's great. That's good. Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, guys.
Really appreciate you also taking the time. Thanks for getting the entire office to take that. Yeah. It is. It definitely is. Well, yeah, absolutely. Wow. And that's what our team is like, so excited about that. Like, seeing every split what our numbers are and the month of people that are, yeah. 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 We do pay them. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And buy into the whole program. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Can I hug you? Yeah. Thank you. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, you know what? April. Oh, yeah. 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 And then want to get back around to January. Okay. Thanks, January. Awesome. Bye, guys. Thank you for jumping in. Thank you for helping us on the photo. Thank you.
Thank you guys for participating.